welcome to Burning Bridges with Bridgeburner, a podcast about level design. Today we're going to cover off slightly more esoteric topic, creativity and inspiration, and things like Mapper's Block that seems to plague a lot of people. And as our guest today, we've got Simpletonium.
Hello.
Someone here who has a lot to say about creativity. We have a lot of good discussions. I see you talking to other people like Reflex and whatnot, and you've got a lot of thoughts about this topic. So you seem like always a natural pick for this one. I think everyone who's been out there trying to make something, they start with that blank slate, be it an editor or a notepad or something. You start with nothing, and then you're like, I want to make a thing. How would you start that process off?
Well, there's a variety of ways to go about it, as there are with pretty much anything. The one that I would say, there's definitely a few. So, first of all, what I like to do is I either sift through inspirational pictures like Pinterest and whatnot. I'm a big proponent of Pinterest.
You are a slut for Pinterest.
I have had my nights where I post 30, 50, 100 Pinterest, like just vomit all over the channel.
Yes.
So there is that. That does feed into a bit of some stuff we'll probably say tonight. So that method may not work for most. It's definitely a starting point. For myself, I would say that it helps and doesn't help, because it can lead you to becoming a little bit more distracted, I guess, because you're trying to reach for these giant ideas. Like if you're looking at environmental art, it's sort of maybe not be the best place to start for some people. Because
like my first kind of like instinctive reaction, I'm very picture inspired as well. Like images, they set the cogs whirring for me all the time. But there's a point where it becomes an overload of information or an overload of ideas. Like you start like all this cool stuff, and there's no way you can make all that. Like I'm sure you're the same. I've got hundreds of things, photos and images and stuff in my inspiration folders, most of which will never get made.
Thousands.
Yeah. So I think it's important. Like you go through that. So if this is your inspiration source, we're talking like probably something pretty big that you're trying to make. More than just a little map. This is kind of like, to me, this is the kind of process I'd go through if you were trying to create something pretty massive in scope, be it a single but very large map, or a multi-wad project, or multi-map project kind of thing. But I do think it's important to be able to pass down your ideas to something manageable.
Yeah. I think the more you can focus on something specific, sorry, I'm just taking my tea bags out here real quick. The more you can focus on something specific, I think the better off you are. And I've had that conversation, and I don't know how many times with tons of people. That specificity can kind of be the death of a lot of progress, because you kind of lend yourself to hyper-focusing on one thing, a certain set of things, something that might not even be related to the way the map is supposed to. You might be like just absolutely suffering over like a hallway for like an inordinate amount of time.
Yeah, so it can go both. Like you can either get too much inspiration, or too broad, or too narrow. And I think for people, it varies from person to person, project to project. It will change. Every time, I think, but finding that sweet spot for getting a good flood of ideas and getting all kind of excited, but then having some spot focus, like I want to make a health theme or something in the style of this game,
right.
or this particular photo of this building. Well, let's explore that building a bit more, and pick parts of that out, because the way that I get around stuff, like because I do, anyone who's seen my work, I like the big stuff. And there's always a lot of ambition there. I'll start with a plan. I do a lot of sketching these days. Not full layouts. I don't sketch everything out and like player goes to here and there's a key and then a door. Like I do that sometimes, but that's actually pretty rare. It's more I want like a bridge or like a big kind of cavernous map or something that's a bridge over a canyon. Like there's usually some sort of kind of like broad, fairly simple, but like a seed. But then what I'll do is I'll find something small to build first, a pillar or a window or a set of stairs, something that I can. So that you go from that big broad stuff to something specific, and the focus gets narrower. And that, for me, that does a couple of things. One, it lets me just get started. It's pretty easy to start making a pillar. Draw a circle, draw some more circles around it. You've got a pillar. And I just start making it look good. Start picking textures, and thinking about those kinds of things, like what kind of visual motifs do I want to go through. And one that's it's an easy thing to start with, but also gives like my subconscious brain a bit of time to start working through how we're going to integrate some of the bigger ideas into things, and it just gets the ball rolling. You were mentioning it might come up in conversation, but that map you were talking about, you started with a shape.
Yes, I do think that's a very good segue.
That is an example of that working. Yeah.
Yes, it is. We're talking about things to do when you have a blank slate. See if I can get this going. I actually have a very concrete example of that working. As some know, I don't actually know how many people know, but I was involved in Jark's Modest Mapping 2. And this is showing up okay?
Yep, all good.
Cool. And for that map, I was actually experiencing a lot of mapper's block before I started on that one. And that was actually something that went through tons of iteration, not even necessarily with what I wound up with, but I just ran through different, like whole entire different maps, trying all sorts of different things. But just kind of probably to illustrate, much to my chagrin, like how easily it can like start, how easy a map can be to start. With this map in particular, like you see this thing I'm zooming in on here, this square piece, this beveled square piece. This was actually a thought that came to me, and pardon the potty talk, but while I was taking a dump, I had this thought. I was like, I want a square. I want it to have pillars on the sides, and I want it to have just this beveled sort of modular sort of look to it. And so that's what began this little square here. Obviously, there's details that were added later, but this big square, I just decided, this sort of octagon shape was better than a square.
Always be
particularly
ABB. Always be beveling.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, love to the bevel, because this entire map is just all bevel. Like everything's bevels. So that was another thing, is that I decided I wanted the beveled look, so that helped me narrow my design focus even more. So I just worked my way out from this basic shape, and that's all it can take sometimes, is just a basic shape. Just multiplied the length by 2 for this one here. And then I decided I wanted to be somewhat symmetrical, and I was like, oh, well, what if it was a triangle? And then we had triangles, and then we built out from the triangles, and then it just sort of got this sort of look to it. And the beginning was all flat, and then I added height variance. I was like, oh, what if this went up? And then on the other side, we had it go up again. So there's 3 different height levels. And just for this map, that sort of process just happened to work. And that's how easily it can be to start a map.
Yeah, like, you're starting with that shape, and then it's something you can just iterate out as an idea. And you can do a lot with a shape. And I like the idea of starting with, like I said before, like a pillar as a shape, a window shape or something like that. And it's I think of it as like dropping a rock in a pond, and the ripples are what you build off. Like you drop that. That's the seed that starts. And
or one might drop a turd in the toilet and watch the ripples as they decide to make their map forward.
Indeed. To continue with a specific analogy.
Water is water, yes.
Yep, ripples everywhere. But I think like
Dave's had enough.
I've always found the starting of a map the hardest part, It's there's not much to get excited about visually. And again, that's another reason to start with that kind of small idea, because it's an easy one to conceptualize. But just skipping back a little bit back to sources of inspiration, because I think this is definitely something that I get asked a lot. It's like, where do you get your ideas from? And you mentioned Pinterest and photo sources, and that is good, but that is also a bit vague. So one thing I do a lot of is I do look at the world through a very different set of eyes than I did a few years ago, in terms of everything can give you an idea. And the motorway that I drove through on the way to work every day became a big source of inspiration for a particular map. A single photo of a pillar or a game that you play. And do you see? Because I know you go on your big binges, but do you think like that when you're just moving through the world?
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because that is something I have noticed in myself that I do less of, but I definitely have done it. Where I would just be, I don't know, on a walk. There was a time, I think maybe 3 months ago, something like that, where my mom, my sister, and I, we went out walking, and there was this big concrete, I guess it was like sort of like a sewer structure, like part of a dam, I think. And
like a culvert kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know what they call it. It was sort of like a cistern, and it like all the water was going down in the bottom, and I guess it had something to do with the way the water was flowing or something like that. But I just loved the way it looked, because the whole brutal, like it looked like Soviet, not Soviet because we're in America, but like Cold War era, like concrete, just this big chunky piece of architecture. And I was like, oh, that looks cool. That would give me a Doom idea. So I definitely have done that before. I think lately I've been getting a little bit too abstract maybe with my ideas, because I have noticed that in myself, where I don't exactly look at the world so much and see like, hey, I could make that. And I've been focusing it a bit more on the environmental art and the stuff that's a little bit less grounded in reality. So that is an interesting point to bring up.
Yeah, because like I'm quite, because I do map in a very abstract. Like my designs are immensely abstract. There's just no semblance of trying to make it look like a real world anything, a useful space that some entity could do some sort of work in. Like, it just doesn't register with me. But and I think it's because of my background in construction. I try and I get very inspired by real world shapes, and I like to build things that look structurally sound and look like they have been built. Which I very much have been enjoying that with the brutalism stuff that I've been working on the last year or so, because like you say, you see a lot of concrete everywhere, and it's an easy one to get inspired by. It'll be interesting to see if when I move to like a different theme, something more gothic, like there's less overt gothic inspiration on my day-to-day life. I might have to dig a bit deeper into the internet to find such things.
Yeah, and that is interesting, because you do make abstract environments, and yet you do have a map in your repertoire that was inspired by a real-world location, and not necessarily even aesthetically as far as like what it looked like, but you have the floor plan of something that you've built in a map.
Yeah, I have.
And so it's sort of like a melding of those two things, where you might not necessarily be taking like, oh, I see concrete over there, I want to make a brutalism map, but you're taking the layout of the thing and putting it into your own little abstract, like, sort of hell imagining of that thing.
And that was, at the time, that was still the best thing I'd made, I reckon. It never got released, and it will reappear in some form or another. But that is a good example of like, you're taking that specificity, that real world kind of design, and then turning it into something visually abstract. And yeah, for the record, it was a retirement village. Amenities block that I built when I was an apprentice, and it was like, I'm gonna turn this into. I thought, because I did feel like the layout in that I was building, it was building. It had like lots of interesting rooms, and it wasn't wasn't like apartments or anything where it's just lots of repeating stuff. That's boring. It was an amenities box. It had a big restaurant, open area with a huge frog's mouth window, and then there was like a library and a pool room, and then underneath it had like utility rooms for workmen to and lots of interesting shapes. And it was just like walking around, as I built it and got very intimately familiar with it, as you do when you make something and spend a year there. It was like, oh, this I can see running around here shooting stuff, Probably not the best thing to think about in a retirement village, but that's a good example of taking something very real world space based, but turning it into something abstract. And the other thing that I've done more of as I've gone through this journey is. When I play games, it's not just a case of like, oh, here's a pretty thing, I want to make that, which there is a lot of, but the way things are intertwined and layout design, and do you find yourself thinking about like just when you play for fun, do those thoughts creep into your head very often?
Absolutely. It's actually, I wouldn't say it's frustrating, because it's not. It's enjoyable. I really enjoy playing games, and I really enjoy playing games that work well and are built well. But yes, that is something I think about all the time, especially when I'm playing games like Doom Eternal that are still in the Doom sphere, but it doesn't even have to be a Doom game. Like, it could be, like, I've gotten super into Valorant lately, and that actually, in an interesting way, has made me think about how Doom levels would be structured if you built them more in like a multiplayer map sort of way, where you have sight lines and you have this and that, and each kind of corner gives you an advantage or a disadvantage. So like your inspirations don't even necessarily have to be from a single player Doom game, but they can be. And Doom Eternal or Doom 2016 in particular is an interesting example, because a lot of people have said, I think even Junction might have said this when you had him on, that those maps are built like multiplayer maps.
Yes, the arenas, and particularly in Doom Eternal, they feel like deathmatch arenas. Yeah.
And that's, it's great. It's
and
good stuff.
It works really, really well, and it's crept into my designs of late, because it's like these are fun, and I think a lot of it's that verticality split. You got lots of height variance and jump pads, and there's often 3 tiers of kind of combat space, and where the enemies are will dictate which one's an advantageous place to be, and it will of course change as things pressure you, and it's very similar to playing deathmatch free-for-all, and that helps with Doom Eternal's case because the enemies are so aggressive. They move more like a player in terms of hunting you down. No place stays safe for very long.
For sure. Overall, I would say it's having mapped. I would say it's kind of hard to turn that part off. Like, it just sort of passively creeps in while you're playing something. Just like, oh, I wonder how they did that, or like, I wonder like what they were thinking when they did this, because that just plays so well and that flows really well. And I wonder, like, what were the processes? Like, did they block it out first? And did this go through any iterations? That's, oh wow, look at that loop that they did, and wow, I love the way they put these secrets over here and this and that. So yeah, I think that's something that's pretty tough to turn off.
Yeah,
when you're playing other games.
I think it's a good thing. Like, I don't feel like it, like, because there's probably a risk that you get overly analytical and stop just enjoying the experience. But I don't think I've found that. Like, I can still play a game and have a lot of fun, and then
not at all.
After a fight or a sequence, you go, why did I enjoy that? Oh, that's cool. And
yes, pretty much. Yeah.
Particularly like if you play a game again and you can go through it, like. Yeah, like when you watch a movie, the first time you watch it, you're just there for the ride. You're just trying to pick up the plot. And then the second time you start microanalyzing bits and pieces and picking out small details. I think, if you really want to like pick ideas out of a specific game, playing it that second time allows you to be a bit more micro-focused.
That's actually... Yeah.
Oh, carry on, go.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's actually something that I... kind of like almost so like I think about that the first time I'm playing a game. I'm like, man, I'm not gonna be able to sit back and think about all the things that worked when I played through that arena. It's always like the second time. So it's interesting, because that's how much it creeps in while you're playing. It's like, not to say that it ruins the first experience, but it's just there.
It's definitely a different kind of experience. Um,
It's cool.
So going back to our example, I'll go back to talk about the process of like building that. So you've started. So we'll talk about like a single map kind of concept here. You've started with you've got an idea. You've maybe got some shapes going. You're thinking about your height, like maybe thinking back to something that worked well, and like maybe your Mapwatch 1 map, which was obviously a bit different because you were collabing with that one. But that to me that always struck me as a map that you push through nice quickly and successfully, and the end product was very, very good. Did you, with that one, was it just a case of making area after area and you just keep going, or did you jump around? Did you get stuck on any areas and have to come back to them, or how did that one go?
I actually had talking about this map in my back pocket. And actually, Junction has a question that I think will tie into me talking about this. So this is like an example of like looking back at something that I've made, where I could see what I did. And you mentioned, were there any problem areas? I actually have. Actually, I'm looking at it right now. My desktop is the final arena of that map, which I think is probably your favorite part of that map.
Not necessarily, but I do very much like it.
Yeah, I've heard quite a few things about that part. But that was an area that was a big problem area, because pretty much like I don't know what it was, like 3 days or like 2 days before the thing was due.
You got in a frenzy, didn't you? And you met for like 30 hours straight or something stupid.
We didn't have that final arena done, and I basically told Lorenzo, like, I'll work on the final arena, like the final arena will be my part or whatever. And he's like, okay, but we're getting kind of close, like the final arena, And I'm like, yeah, the final arena. And then, as you said, it was like 30 hours or 35 hours straight of just mapping with orbit culture in the background. To that final arena, and it popped out. Like there was times when I was like literally brick wall blocked, and then I was just like, fuck that, we're just like fucking, and then just tapping away and like, that doesn't work, we'll throw that out and do this and do that, and it was just I just pooped it out, and it was actually pretty good.
It's a weird kind of fugue state,
Yeah,
the red mist descends, and then when it lifts, we've got to finalize the arena.
I wouldn't recommend that, by the way.
No.
For those who are thinking that, you could just map something out in 35 hours. There is this thing called sleep.
Yes, yeah. I mean, although, like, in your obviously your life as being a student and all that, you've got the ability to do it, and like if you do have that energy, it is very much something that you want to tap into as long as you can. And, anyone who watches me knows, I do the 10, 12 hour, not quite 35, but long stints of dev work, just charging and having fun. And if you get in that state, you do want to, unfortunately you can't bottle it, but the next best thing is to make as much use of it as possible. And
definitely.
And then try and kind of, when you leave off and you have to go to bed because you've got work the next day or whatever, try and leave off at a point where you can go, where you have at least the chance to tap back into it, that excitement and that idea, and like keep going, because there's nothing worse than feeling great and making progress and then having to stop. And then
I got work in the morning,
and then not be able to get back into it and go, what the fuck was I doing here? I don't, and it becomes a struggle again.
Right.
And because like that map. It is a big map. Even with two people working on it, it was a sizable thing to create in the 3 weeks that we had. Looking at it from the outside, to me it screams like a lack of, like, no mapper's block, like good creative flow. Like, was that the case? Like, did the whole thing flow?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty smooth sailing up until close to the end, and then even then, I mean, it never felt hopeless. I'll say that. Like, there was mapper's block, but it wasn't like, oh my god, I don't know what to do. Like, I knew what I wanted to do.
There's no panic.
I wanted a cataclysmic final arena, but just like the what's and the hows were a little bit more foggy. But there was no momentum stopping mapper's block associated with it on that one. And it was a bit of that like bottled frenzy energy of just like mapping and enjoying it. It was like a weird mixture of like suffering and enjoying it at the same time because of the deadline and the whole 35 hours being awake. But it was fun. I'd do it again.
Good to hear.
I would definitely do it again.
10 out of 10 would map for 2 days straight again. So I think this is probably like, this will be a topic that is close to everyone's heart. Anyone who creates, but it's when you have those struggle points. So I think it's important to recognize what's the cause of a creative block. And are you just tired? Go get some sleep. Because it's hard to be creative when you're tired. Normally. Sometimes you can go for 2 days, but is it just a case you just need to recharge your batteries, go do something else for a few days, and come back fresh, or is it a specific problem with a specific progression point or an area? It's like you just don't know what to do right there, or is it I have no ideas at all? So I think we'll start with the small and then go big. So like. One thing that I do when I'm making a map and is I'll bounce around from zone to zone and tend to have like 3 or 4 areas kind of on the go. And that way if I start struggling on an area, I'll just come back to that later. Go look over here. Like Bastion of Chaos, there was a particular area that I left right to the very end because I had no clue what I wanted to put there in terms of like a fight setup. I just had this kind of like pretty much blank area. I was like, I don't know what to do here. We'll figure that out later. Is that something? Do you map in that way, or is it more of a like you try and go sequentially through start to finish, build the beginning first, build the end last?
Yeah, I would say I don't. I probably should do more of that, to be honest. Of like having different areas on the go. Like we were just talking about the map, which one map? Like that map was pretty much room by room. It was a little bit different because we had 2 people, so it's not quite the same. I think that was part of what made that map work was because we had 2 people working on 2 separate areas at once. So in that sense, that whole concept of like have more than one area on the go is a pretty sound concept, I would say. But yeah, I wouldn't say, at least for me, I don't normally map that way. Like when I'm mapping on my own, it's sort of like when something feels okay enough to move on from, I'll move on from it. Like I don't usually get super stuck in one area because I know what that can do. So in that sense, like I'll move on if I'm like really not vibing with what I'm doing, and I'll come back to it later. But yeah, it tends to be a little bit more sequential for me than hopping.
Do you start at the beginning? Do you consciously, I'm going to build the beginning of the map first and then build out?
I used to do that. And it used to like fuck with my brain.
Yeah.
Because I used to be like, why is he here? What does the beginning mean? Like what is this area I'm putting him in? And I was like, I can't do that anymore. So
we can't,
I have to just
if there's no map, you can't give it context. So if you're trying to give it context without anything to start with, it's like
it's just
loop.
Like if there would be a takeaway, I would say don't do that. If it works for you, do it. But if it doesn't, do not do it, because it's like a pain in the ass if you do that.
I mean, like several of my maps I've built the end first, and quite often I'll build the middle, or just wherever the idea is to start with. And I think that helps with me because I always start off with a visual. We normally start with some sort of visual concept, and it's like I'll figure out where this fits in the map later. It's gonna build the thing that I want to build, and
I think it's sort of like if you were drawing a picture, and you started with you started with like a weird part of somebody's body, and then like because you started at that point and you tried to draw around it, everything's out of proportion now, and it just doesn't look right. That's
actually quite a good analogy, and I haven't.
So like. If you, I mean, I don't know if there's any artists in the room, and they're gonna yell at me for saying that, but to me that makes sense. Where it's like because you've decided to start somewhere that you weren't like quite confident with where you started, or you try to force it too much, now all your proportions are out of whack. So I think like as long as you start somewhere and you allow it to either be or not be the beginning of the map, then it's fine.
I think like with a. This is speaking as someone who is not a artist in terms of like painting or drawing or whatever. But to me, when you're creating a piece of art like that, you start with the important part. You start with the focus. You're drawing a picture of a dragon. You probably start with the dragon. You won't start with the mountains in the background. even if it's just to sketch it out, like maybe you don't do the detail work, but you want to position, you want to get like you said, the proportions and the perspectives right, and the amount, like balance the amount of negative space around the primary focal points. And I think it kind of ties into like, I would never start a map by drawing the outside of the map first. You don't want to lock yourself in and restrict yourself, unless it's like you try to like, deliberate. There's some projects that have a specific play space restriction, like that's completely different. But I'll always try and start with something central and something important, like even if it's just visually important, something fairly grandiose, whether it's a big big pillars and a big set of stairs, or a big kind of hallway, or something that you can build around as a kind of core concept. I think that picture analogy did actually resonate with me quite a bit there.
And I think sometimes like it doesn't even necessarily, like I really wouldn't say there's a hard and fast rule to where the start of your map goes, because I think the more you make a hard and fast rule about it, the worse it's going to be. Like because sometimes you might have a concept where you have it sort of planned out, where you want a major focal area, and then to build around that or whatever, and then sometimes you might not have an idea that's that like concrete, so maybe you might start the map a little bit differently. So I think it really depends on like where the person is deciding their map is supposed to go as well.
For sure, like
kind of thing.
And that's when you get to concepts like we ascending a tower, descending into a pit. Is it a journey through something? Is it like if you're going through from one end to a canyon or whatever, but is it a horizontal journey that the players go on? And I think that's where you start thinking about those kind of progression presentations, that try and tell that environmental story through like if you're ascending a tower, well, you're probably going to start on the outside as a player and move in, but not necessarily. You could come up from a basement. Like there's actually options to do anything. To be fair, Yep, I lost my train of thought there. So, talking about like a specific map, and plenty of people have gotten stuck on one map, and maybe you can't progress there. And we'll start talking like moving to like like you're doing a project, and that I always seem to have multiple maps on the go. Like the one that I've been working on recently for the last couple of months is something that actually started up almost 2 years ago. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best way to do things, but for me, I do find having the ability to go, okay, I'm kind of dry on this map everywhere. I don't really know how I want to say, like, I don't know how to finish the map. Like, I don't know where I want the final fight, or how it's gonna come to a close. Let's just go work on something else. Is that something that you do, or are you a fan of trying to finish a map before you move on to something else?
I am usually a fan of finishing one map at a time. And I guess I have the little bit of a handicap of not really having like a megawatt or an episode on my hands, because I've never really been much of the workflow of having a bigger thing on the books.
To be able to do that, you need to have that big project or several projects that you can jump between.
Although I could probably guess that you would probably have to have a process for that, like a sort of like do a little bit here, do a little bit there, because I don't think when you're doing something at that scale that you're always going to have energy for every single map, so you probably want to split it up.
Because I find that I tend to work on, I think this is probably a skill that I've learned over the last couple of years, but if there's an area that I'm stuck on, if I move on to something else, my subconscious will almost figure the problem out without me consciously considering it. Like the ideas will just tick around, and all of a sudden, bang! I know what I'm doing there now.
Yeah, and that's sort of like the sleep on it kind of phenomenon.
Yeah, but that can take 6 months. That doesn't necessarily. Sometimes it is just a case of sleeping on it, and I've definitely had that 2 a.m. epiphany. It's like, I know what I'm doing.
I mean, if you want to put it that way, I mean, technically, I have a bunch of maps on the go. I mean, because you might get a little bit stuck on one, and then you do another one. I guess if it depends on how big you want the time scale to be.
Yeah, great. And
so in that sense, yeah, I would say that you lose a bit of steam on one map, move to another one, especially if you have another one in the back pocket.
No, I think I would suggest that to people is don't get hung up on a single map, because if you get to that point, with your map as block, it becomes a genuine wall. Sometimes you can smash through it, and we'll probably talk about some techniques for that. All this kind of stuff that I do, but sometimes you can't. And if you start beating your head against it, you're gonna not enjoy it. You're gonna probably start hating the map. You're gonna not want to work on it, and you're gonna generate a lot of negative energy. That sounds a bit fucking wishy-washy, but it's a thing. Like, you want to feel good about your work, and I'm pretty sure everyone's the same, that you make your best stuff when you're excited and happy, and enjoying the process. So don't. If you do find that you're hitting that wall in a bad way, don't force yourself through it. It'll go badly. I think you'll either make something that you're not happy with, or you just come to a scraping halt. One thing, I mean, like, to be fair, that doesn't happen super often to me. And one of the things that I usually do in that situation is go. We talked about the 1,000 photos that you've got saved in your inspiration folders, and people like, I've got all this cool shit, but I don't know what to do with it. And that's when you go scroll through that, and you just you want to like find like 2 or 3 things like, oh, that might work there. Oh, I like that pillar. Oh, that window's cool. Let's make that. I think I can work that into something. And it doesn't have to be something like big and grandiose. It doesn't have to be like a progression focused thing. It's just, you just need something to get that ball rolling again. And I find that's when those inspiration folders become the most useful, is when you're a little bit stuck on ideas. You just need something to kick the ball again down the road, and plant the next seed to build from.
Yeah, and I would actually probably stress the fact of making it a point probably not to look for the more grandiose ideas. Just like, I don't think when you're already a bit blocked, you should then go ahead and be like, but big idea. It's like, no, like that happens to me, where it's like,
you don't want that. You don't want to look at that epic hell vista with like multiple structures and aqueducts.
It's gonna make it worse.
It's like you're gonna like, you won't know where to start. And to me, that's why because recently there's a big kind of hallway. I knew I wanted a big hallway, kind of with a bit of a curve to it. Big set of stairs like leading up to, and a wave of revenants or bone reavers coming down, and a rough idea of the kind of fight I wanted. But it's like, what do I want this hallway to look? And what I did is I just went looking for like a beam profile, and there was the ones that you commented on how you like that triangle shape, and that was just a photo of a I don't know if it was a house or a museum or whatever, but it was like, I like that shape. I can make that shape. And
okay. And then I didn't know that's where that came from.
Yeah, and it's just like, that was easy to do. Follow that profile, slap that around a few times. Yeah, this is starting to work, and it just got those cogs moving nicely. I do like the idea of finding those small inspiration bits.
Well, I would have a follow-up question to that. Would you say that sort of thing becomes easier to do when you say, like, for example, you already have the skeleton of a hallway, so you say, I'm going to go look at hallways?
Yes.
Or is it?
Yep. I would say so. Well, maybe not easier, but it helps you to eliminate non-useful inspiration. So I know I wanted a hallway, and I knew I wanted something to put in as like a beam kind of thing. Something I can iterate around and follow the profile of the curve. So I had a rough idea of the kind of shape that I wanted to grab, or what would fit in there. And that meant that 90% of those images that I've got, I could just flat out ignore. Like, no, and like, that looks useful. No. That one might work as well. Grab those 3 or 4, shuffle them around, pick the one that you like the most, or there might be just one that just jumps out at you very quickly. And the other thing that I do with mine is, if I normally do this at the start of the map, is I'll go through and go, what kind of designs do I like today, and grab a dozen max, 6 to 12 images, and chuck them in a separate folder. And that way, and I'll think about like, how can I use these different things a little bit, And then I'll kind of forget about them for a while, but that's where I'll head first. Like, oh, that's right, I wanted to make that, didn't I? Huh. And that's when I'll do that. Let's go start a new area. We've got this concept. It's a pillar or something. And in the Godless Gate map, I did that. Those kind of like flowery pillars. I was like, I'm going to make this pillar. This looks like fun. And I just picked a new spot away from everything, not burdened by existing geometry, and just started making that. And that just grew into like a pretty cool space. I think it's how you use your inspiration shots is almost as important. Well, it's more important than getting inspired.
Having them.
Yeah. Because as you know, it's really easy to go through and find your 50 favorite photos and think how awesome they are.
I think we were talking about that the other day. I think it was like, what's the cutoff between inspiration and just parroting for the sake of I like this picture?
Yep.
Is your sense of inspiration for this image because it's a pretty picture, or because it's a bit feasible to do and you actually would find it interesting? Because like, I know for me, it's like, oh my God, I love this picture. I would love to make this. But it's like, sometimes you need to just be like tell your brain, like, I know you like the picture, but like, can you make the picture? Like, does the picture help?
Is it useful?
Does it help? Is it helpful?
Or is it
just, a bit of a distraction?
Yeah, and that links into another point that I had a note for is, what's the limiting factor in implementing it? And I think it's really important to recognize like when it is just something that looks cool. And people in their inspiration channel for the Hellforge is posting like cool hellscapes all the time, and they're fucking cool. But I look at them like, I can't make that, or it'll be too hard. It's too broad. It's too detailed, and sure, it looks cool. Maybe it could like provide some sort of inspiration for a skybox or something, or there's like something small in there that I'll pull out. But generally, and there's some of the Doom Eternal concept art. There's that one with that there's a big demon with like lava pouring out of its eyes, leaning over and chained up, like fucking epic shot. I'd love to turn that into a scene, but unless I get a model made for the skeleton, it's not going to happen. There's a lot of stuff going on there. It's just it's very visually complex. It would be a real mission to recreate that scene. I don't view that as a good inspiration photo.
Right, and that's a good point. Is like, do I want to recreate this picture because I like the picture, or do I want to just appropriate some of the picture? Because I don't think you want to just be like, I'm going to make this scene in Doom. I think that's gonna.
It's like, do I just want to grab the color scheme? General, cool, these gothic crenellation shapes. Do I want to use that as a design idea? Because actually, probably the most straight, I want to recreate a thing from Doom Eternal that I've done was the Exultia Hellgate. Those triple in Doom Eternal. Yeah. Beautiful. I love that. And I was like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, I want to make this. And I tried to do that.
Building.
Oh, it's just epic, so epic. And I tried to do that in Bastion of Chaos. And I went too hard on completely accurately copying the details on it. And I could have made it work, but just the way that, the GC Doom engine works and Doom Builder and stuff like that, it was becoming a real grind. And that was the area that I left till the end to finish off as well. So I think that became a real stumbling block. So that was a I dove too heavily into the specifics, but I actually recognised that after. I think it was one of those moments where I was making it, I was feeling pretty good, but I had a few drinks, stopped for the day, came back the next day, and like, what the fuck was I doing again? This is messy. It's like kind of in the cold, sober light of the next day. It was like, this might be a bad idea. So I simplified it, and like, there's still the shape there. The concept is there, and there's some of the profile, like imagery is the same, but I actually stripped it back conceptually in the end, and like, okay, let's try and let's recognize that it's either a technical skill deficiency or just an engine, not being suitable element, and build for what we know works. Keep the shape, the broad shape there, the general ideas there, but let's kind of leave it at that and stop being inspired by something else, and just make something that looks cool. And I just started like, okay, we'll just chuck some other details around here and some big chains, and the end result was good.
Yeah, I think I can sort of like feel like not your map anymore if you take too much inspiration. That's like if you're trying to recreate something to the T, it's like, well, that's not really fun anymore, because it's like, why just copy it?
Yeah, you're just parroting, and you know, at best you're copying it, worse you're actually plagiarizing.
Yeah, you're copying it worse than probably. Yeah.
I think that probably links it similar to planning too heavily, and I think planning is a good thing generally. I like to plan my layouts, you know, to a degree, because it means that when you do get stuck on an area, you can kind of go build somewhere else, and you know how that you've got an idea how they link together. I think that makes it easier to jump around areas of the map if you've got a big picture kind of idea. But if you plan too heavily and you get too obsessed with following your plan, you get to the same problem. It starts feeling stilted and forced, and you reject other ideas because they're not part of your plan. You know, you reject ideas because they're not part of that photo that I was inspired by. It's like, no, you definitely should be following all of any ideas. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea. If it's like, this feels exciting to do, and I like it, and yeah, it's that balancing of your own expectations. And I've definitely been guilty of it in the past, and I went through a phase where I was planning too heavily and getting too focused on following certain things rigidly. And I took a step back and thought, no, okay, I need to get back to my, you know, being a bit more of an organic mapper, which which I was very much initially. So yeah, and I think inspiration is very much the same. You can lean too heavily on it.
Agree.
So yeah, we talked a bit about like the technical skill kind of thing, and it's interesting. You can actually, so there's a principle in sports psychology where and this works for team sports, it's individual sports, it's universal across pretty much every sport. You're at a certain skill level. If you play someone who's better than you, you will play better. To a point. If they're a certain level above you, you just get crushed. And I actually feel very similarly about mapping, in the sense that if you want to you want to improve, and you see these ideas and I can't quite work on them. There is actually a point where if you push yourself into something that you can't quite make just yet, you will learn, you'll get there. You'll get through the process. Provide you work, there'll be a bit of work involved, a bit of struggle, a bit of deleting and remaking and stuff like that. But if it's back to that Doom Eternal shot, that's too much. That's too far beyond what I'm capable of. You'll just suffer. I think it's important to recognize when it's like, that's just a little bit out of my reach, but I think I can get there. And like, I've done stuff where I was like, I want to make this weird slopey facade. Like there's in the Godless Gate map, there's that zigzaggy profile, which was inspired by a Soviet circus arena. I'd never made anything like that before.
Interesting.
And it was like 6 hours of like, what the fuck am I doing? But by the end of it, I was like, ooh, this actually worked. And it was like, getting used to the slope handles and some of the new tools and new Ultimate Doom Builder. That was a process that I did not know how to make that when I started it. I had a rough idea of how, but like the way I just split 3D floors up and all that kind of stuff, it was a learning experience. So I could point to that as a good example of aspiring towards something that you're not quite capable of just yet, being a good thing.
Yeah, I guess you're sort of like resetting your baseline, so to speak. I think you take issue with this analogy every time I say it, but I'm going to say it anyway, even though it violates the laws of physics.
Do I have to hit you?
But the analogy is you shoot for the stars and you wind up on Mars or something like that. So it's like you got further than you could have because you shot for the stars.
Yep.
So it's obviously a flawed analogy, but it's the same concept where you might have gone further if you set your goal really high, as opposed to, and then you could say like might want to take the safe bet and take a goal that's further further back, but I think the concept is sound. Like if you take a goal that's further off, well, you might wind up a little bit higher than you might not reach the goal, but you got pretty far. For sure. So I think that's true.
Yeah, and like it's harnessing ambition is a tricky thing. Ambition without dedication and focus and skill and improve, like it doesn't get you anywhere by itself. So but it's a very powerful thing if you can harness it. But you do have to manage it, And we've all seen those, particularly it's more common with new mappers, but we've all seen those people come in and have huge ideas, and 6 months later they've stopped, they're burned out. Yep, we've all been there, and that was me for years. But before I joined the community, that was a lot of what happened to me as well. Like I get all worked up in a frenzy, and I'm going to make a 32 map megawatt, and maybe make a dozen maps, but then get tired and go do something else for 7 years. So. That is a natural process to go through, and it's a learned skill. And I think it's a flaw. It's not a flaw. Sorry, it's something natural to younger people is to have that big ambition and not quite know how to utilize it.
It's sort of like the I don't really know how to say it, but it's just sort of like part of the course. Like young people feel things really hard. Yep. So like that's sort of like their own cross, is that because they're so animated and so excited, it leads them to disappoint themselves. Like, doesn't always happen, but it really does happen in mapping. I see. Like, and I had a gotcha for that. Like I had a little phrase. It's like, it was like unfocused ambition. It was like pain because of unfocused ambition, or hurting your own feelings, basically.
Yeah.
Like. Your passion is fine. Like, it's fine that you're passionate. Like, it's a good thing. But like, if you don't temper it with like experience and knowing your limits and all these sort of things, you are going to suffer, basically, because you're not paring back your expectations with your ability. And that's something I'm definitely guilty of.
Definitely, 100% agree.
As anybody who is in the Hellforge the past week or so knows.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't agreeing that you're an example of that. Although, I do agree with that.
I mean, I am.
But you are fairly young.
It is what it is.
It is what it is, and like it's important that you recognise it, and you've at least made that step, and you're like, okay, I've identified this, issue. Because I wouldn't call it a flaw or a bad character trait, because it's just a product of, I think, certain personality types, and just being young and excitable, like and that it's a good thing to have that, and you don't want to crush it, you don't want to destroy that feeling. It's like with kids, and they're all like, young and exuberant and excited by the world and full of energy, and then society tells them to sit down and shut up and eat your vegetables.
And control yourself.
And by the time they're an adult, they're dull corporate drones.
They're a Squidward.
Essentially, they've been beaten down, and like that's a bad thing. You want to teach them to harness that, and I think like in terms of like your mapping journey, like people like yourself are still kind of in that childlike state. But
I think it's very important, to be honest. Like, I think if you don't have childlike joy for something, like I don't want to say you're not, but like I think you get closer to your baseline sense of what inspires you, like your sort of like childish awe of things. Like I think that's kind of tragic when people lose that, to be honest.
100%, and I think that's a big part of my strength as a source, as someone who gets very easily inspired. I don't often not have ideas. Is I just genuinely enjoy the process. I just lose myself in the fun. But I've got that experience and the thousands of hours of using the tools to know, like, recognize what I can and can't implement and how to utilize the inspirations I do get. But yeah, it's a big part of my process is just like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to make the cool thing and getting all excited.
And I don't think I would be out of place in saying like the people that are actually in the field, like we have Junction in the chat. Like I would say that they have the passion, but they also have the experience and they have the skill. Yep. Like the people who are just starting out, they have the passion and nothing else.
Yep.
And it's because their passion is so strong that they put themselves through a lot because of their passion. So it's like you need to eventually work up to where your passion's at. And
and I've seen some graphs around that kind of thing, like a graph of your ability versus how you perceive your ability, and where they intersect and cry. There's actually some quite good generalization kind of things, but quite useful visual aids for that kind of stuff. Where you start off thinking you're way better than you are. And then your skill catches up, but then your perception of your skill starts dropping because you start trying to do even harder things and you can't pull them off because your skills have gone up, so you want to do more stuff, and then you start thinking you're shit at what you do, and then it'll bounce back, and it's a process to manage, and if you can ride the highs, as it were, and just kind of skip like a stone from peak to peak, is kind of like the ideal state to be.
I think somebody put it to me like, it's because your taste is really good that you think you're not good. Like, it's like, I don't know how much I agree with it, but it's sort of like you recognize where you could be, and that kind of makes you a little bit sad. So you're not like, you know what is good.
Yeah, I can see.
And you know what you like, but you're not quite able to do it yet. So it makes you feel worse, even though you may be improving.
Yeah, correct. And like, it's so that last point I think is where you've latched onto something. Is you see this thing that you can't do, and you want to be able to do it, and the whole time you can't do it, you feel bad about it, even though you're getting better. Yeah. So I think it's important to latch on to recognizing we have improved. And I think this is actually I would start tying to some of these questions, because there's one in particular that I think
there were some good questions.
Yeah, that tied into that. Like, do you look back at your old stuff and how do you feel? And I think that is another important thing, is to like, even though you might not, like you say, shooting for the stars, but maybe landing on Mars, recognize that is an achievement, that you've gotten better, that map might not have been as good as you had it in your head, but by the time you finished it, whether or not you were happy with it, you've gotten better. And I can look at like... It's okay.
I think that was something that I sort of arrived at after last week, was like, a lot of people will say that you shouldn't make mapping feel like work. And to a lot of extent, that's very true. Like, it's a hobby. You should enjoy it. It should be fun. But I think that should scale a little bit with where you have your own personal expectations set too. So like, if you are a person like me, where you're constantly having these enormous ideas and you want to explore that, and you want to go higher and you want to go further, there's a degree of work to be done. Like, you don't just get there by wanting it.
Yes. And actually, this is an idea I think we should explore a little bit. Because I'm a firm believer in, like, you don't want it to feel like work. This is a hobby. You should have fun. If you don't enjoy it, why the fuck are you doing it?
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to get better, if you have that aspiration, that ambition to look at those those things, whether it's like I want to recreate these environments in my Doom maps, or I want to make maps like Person X, there will be work involved. So it's an interesting dichotomy, actually, because there are plenty of mappers, and if you are happy making stuff that doesn't really vary much from map to map or project to project, like in terms of like absolute skill level, sure, you can explore other ideas and different concepts and visual presentations and texture packs and all that. You can still make different maps, but not necessarily getting better in quotation marks. That's great. Like if that's, and I think that's a lot of mappers are like that. They'll naturally get better just by doing it, but they're not too concerned, say, about becoming the best or making the grandest thing or whatever. If you are someone who is ambitious and gets big ideas, you do have to, and that's where it comes to that tempering with experience. You do have to put in work, and you will have to force yourself into uncomfortable spaces. Yep. Where shit's going wrong. It's not fun. Yeah. But you have to be able to push through it. And I'm thinking a really good example is Major Arlene, for I think it was a Hillbane map, tried to recreate something from dusk as a certain ceiling profile. And she did not enjoy it. But she learned a lot, and fortunately the end result was very good. But she learned a lot doing that, and it was a painful process, and that would have felt like work, and it could have been easy, like, fuck it, I'm not doing this, I'm going to do something simple or something that I already know how to do, and probably would have still been completely, the map would have been as good as if it didn't have this thing, but she learned something through that process. And I think it's really important to, if you want to get it, like you do, like that's why I said, like aspiring to be to try and make something that's just a little bit out of your skill range, and using that as a learning experience, and then you'll master some new techniques, and then the next time you do something like that, well, it'll be a lot easier.
And I think it is worth mentioning, like, anybody who's really good at something, like, you never hear them talk about how easy it was. Like,
no.
you'll never hear that. Like, they won't be like, I really wanted to get good at gymnastics, and because I was so passionate about it, it was just smooth like butter, and I went right through. And I'm a master gymnast.
The day after, that was awesome. Yeah.
Like, I think that's the part that people miss with the whole like you shouldn't treat it like work argument. I mean, it's a good argument. Like it's there's a lot of truth to it, but like it really depends on what you want.
You shouldn't treat it like work, but like you shouldn't treat it like a job. But there will be work involved. There is work is part of the process. Working hard.
Yeah.
And whenever someone asks me, like I get relatively regularly, how long have you been doing this? Does this take a lot of effort? And I'm like, it's fucking thousands of hours of work to get to where I am.
And I was thinking about that the other day. I was like,
literally thousands.
In my brain, to me, it was just like, I want to be good already. But it's like, no.
The impatience of youth,
it's probably like, you're looking at like 3-5 years to be any sort of good, I think. I
think like a reasonable 3 to 5 years would if you put a bit of effort into, you'd get pretty talented at anything. But it's you need to do like learning a musical instrument. You need to practice regularly,
right?
And you don't have to say every time I sat down, because I haven't played my drums for years or something. But when I was in the swing of things, I got better when I just did it often.
And I think framing it that way kind of removes a bit of the mystique of it all, like the whole treating it too seriously, whatnot, because you do the same thing with an instrument.
Yep.
Where if you want to be good at playing music, you need to practice, and if you don't practice, you lose it.
Yep.
Very quickly.
And if you want to get better, you have to push yourself into slightly harder things. And
I was a musician for 12 years. I played trumpet, and during those 12 years, I didn't get that much better at trumpet a lot of the time because I didn't practice. And I knew I didn't practice.
That's the thing. If you think about it, you fucking know if you're putting in the time, like the requisite amount.
And that's another thing. We always talk about sunk time fallacy. Because I could sit back and be like, I played trumpet for 12 years and this and that, but it's like I didn't get that much better because I didn't practice.
Yeah, it's like did you played it, but did you actually play the trumpet? As a discipline. It sounds like probably not, but then there's nothing wrong. I think it's just important to recognize that. It's not necessarily it's not a bad thing. If you enjoy just kind of bumbling around with a musical instrument, fuck yeah, go for it. And that's a lot of what my drumming has been, is just me bumbling around on the drum kit and having fun. But same thing with mapping. If you want to get better, if you want to hit those lofty heights, it takes time.
And I think that's sort of like, and I would harken it back to playing trumpet again, because there's something particular about playing wind instruments, particularly trumpet, where your endurance, your actual physical endurance, like your mouth muscles, will strengthen over time, and you'll be able to play higher notes and things like that because of, it's called your embouchure. And if you're not practicing, you can't play higher notes. Like your skill ceiling has literally
a physical limitation,
chopped off.
So
I think
drumming's the same.
Mapping is sort of similar. Your ability reaches a threshold if you don't keep at it. Because you're not training those, I guess, more up here muscles, but you're not training it.
For sure. And it's funny. You talk to someone about, say, a sport or an instrument, and they will inherently grasp that you need to put on time to get better. And Foamy raised a good point here. There's a difference between years spent doing a thing and hours spent doing a thing. Okay, you may have been playing trumpet for 12 years, but how many hours have you spent playing the trumpet?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of sort of like what I was trying to get at. I could say that I've been playing it for 12 years, but practically doesn't mean anything if those 12 years weren't spent actually playing the instrument. You
could play social soccer for a decade, just fucking around with your friends and having fun, but then you're probably not going to get that much better unless you actually go to the practices and do drills and training. And people understand that, though, with sports or musical instruments, they grasp that and, okay, cool, if I want to get better at this, I do have to put in some time. And I think it's interesting with a creative discipline. So the analogy here would be, I think, more analogous to mapping is writing music. Because learning how to play and getting good at, technically, that's one thing. That's a time-based. There's drills you can do, you can practice. There's rudiments that you can train, and to do that to get better, there'll be a strict kind of regimen. But to flex that kind of creative side, it's a bit more tricky, and it is a very amorphous process. but it is still inherently linked. Like, you get better the more time you put into it. And I think it's a real important thing that a lot of people don't quite realize with mapping is, sure, you can learn all the technical stuff and master the various tools, but to get better at the holistic process, you need to do the whole thing a lot. All right, so let's move on to the. Have you got anything else you want to add to that particular topic?
Well, we did talk about the whole, more like composing music is a lot more related to it. I did have something to say about that. I would think even just like the act of being creative is sort of the same thing, where it might not be as technical or mechanically oriented as playing an instrument. Like, you're still getting better at a skill, which is the skill of creating in the first place. So, like,
definitely,
the more you're comfortable with how to be creative, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Then the easier it's going to be each time you go to do it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
so sort of the same concept.
I'd 100% agree that it's a learned skill, and we've talked about various articles and stuff, like there was that Ray Bradbury one about writing, and like how to get good at it. Just do it. Like, every week write a short story kind of thing, and things like speed mapping, I'd say, are the mapping equivalent, and just practicing creating shit. Like, it doesn't have to be good, but practicing creating new stuff. It's a mindset, and if you do it more, you'll get better at getting into that quickly.
And just quickly back to that idea of people that have their ambitions set way high and their passion for it is all up here. Just like considering that idea of practicing being important, because for me that kind of clicked the other day as well, where I was like, well, if I think about it less as I can't achieve what I want and that makes me kind of sad, if I think about it more like I am working towards it, and just because it doesn't feel amazing every time I do this, or I make a room, or like, it shouldn't feel amazing every single time. At least I don't think so, because if you're working and you're getting better, it's not always like peaches and rainbows.
Well, I think if you think you're always, like, if you're in that kind of mind state all the time, you're probably delusional, to be honest. And I'm guilty of definitely leaning into that and being in love with everything I make. I'll admit I do that.
And if that works for you, I mean, that's perfectly valid. Like, I would definitely not take anything away from that.
No, but there's still parts of, like, the process where I struggle, for sure. Like, it's not like, maybe the end result's always like that, and there's definitely, like, I hit that high quite often. Like, fuck yeah, this is good shit. But I can point to very recent examples over the last couple of weeks where it's like, this is fucking hard work. Like, the map I've been working, I've commented couple of times, like, this has been a tricky thing to make, and it hasn't always been, as you say, peaches and cream the whole time.
Yeah, I think the grind, like, people will get scared off by the grind. I think that applies to me as well. Like, the grind is scary. It feels like it's not fun. So if it's not fun, I ought to not do it, right? Because it's supposed to be fun. So that's where I think that little nugget of wisdom might be a little bit flawed in that sense, because it's not really capturing the whole picture of, like, the whole, you need to get better.
Yep.
Like, just because it's not fun doesn't mean that it's like the end of the world,
And that's back into, like, it is work, and while it shouldn't feel like it all the time, it will feel like it sometimes, and that is fine, normal, and should be expected, I think. Sometimes you sit down at the editor and you spend 4 hours on it, and you're like, fuck, that was a bit shit. Like, that was hard. I'm tired. I didn't enjoy that. You'd probably still achieve something, though.
Like coming home from practice.
Exactly. You have a shit day out. Like,
beat up.
Yep. Or you fumbled catches or whatever. Like, you had a bad day out on the field. Happens, and like most of the time.
How does exercise work?
Yeah. It's the same kind of thing. There is energy expended, and that does make you tired. So, there's a question here from Alfredo, which we've definitely covered over. It's like, we have an ideas channel on the How Forge. Do you have your own ideas folder? Most definitely. I definitely recommend having an ideas folder, and I think, categorizing it is actually a really important thing. Otherwise, you just end up with a big blob of stuff, and you go information overload. So I would recommend that either like by theme, or you can break it down by project. I do it by map. Like I'll create a new folder for a new map and go what stuff I'm going to put in here, and chuck it in there. And I've got other like folders for like different games. Like I've got a Doom Eternal inspiration and a medieval inspiration folder. So definitely have inspiration folders, but I'd recommend breaking them up somehow.
Yeah, I usually will take whatever map I'm working on, like for Age of Hell and then NDE and Dead Tech, I had all folders separated.
Yep.
So I was like, these are my NDE ideas, these are my Hellforge or Age of Hell ideas, and these are my Dead Tech ideas. Yep. And it was just easier to sort through them that way because I don't have fucking massive Pinterest. It's huge. Like, it's stupid. It's ridiculous.
Pinterest slut.
Slut.
This one's from Zen, and it's a question for you, Simple. It's a two-parter. For you personally, with a creative block, do you find it more effective to push through or give the catalyst time naturally? As the former, do you feel that pushing through it affects the quality of work?
So this is a very interesting question, and I did think about it a bit after I saw it. We've actually talked about half of it already. We talked about my map, which was an exercise in being blocked and just pushing right the fuck through it, and it just worked out. Partly because I sort of knew what to do, so I think it does. There's an aspect where it depends on what kind of block it is.
Yep.
And then actually I talked about my TMMC 2 map before as well, where that was coming out of an extreme mapper's block scenario where that was like, I almost don't have ideas, I don't know what to do. So that one was like, make a shape, that's what I'm going to do. And then the other one was like, I'm just going to full bore push through it because I have a deadline coming up. And I think, yeah, so I have some notes here. I was like, I think, so there's that. That's like half of the question. Is those are times when it's worked. And I would actually say pushing straight through a creative block is not always the best thing to do. I would actually encourage people not to do that for the most part if they're really struggling, because I feel like the more you push at it, and I think we talked about this earlier, the more you push at it, I honestly do believe it does affect the quality of the work.
Yeah, and it certainly affects
the quality of the work,
and your mental
just
state.
Affects the quality of your mental state.
Yep, yeah. I think that's probably almost more important. It's like it puts you in a bad, kind of negative mindset because everything's difficult.
Like I would say a block, at least to me personally, a block to me means you need to reassess because something's not working.
Yep.
Like you need to think more outside of the box, or you need to take this idea. If this is what we said earlier, where it depends what kind of creative block it is. You either take the idea that you're stuck on and ask yourself if you really want to do that idea anymore, or you want to change it up or do something different. Or if you're stuck, like no ideas, you have a different way to deal with that. Like maybe you have restrictions you want to put on yourself. Maybe it's too open-ended, so you want to restrict it down. You don't know what to do yet. You want to keep a theme in the back of your head. You want, what kind of gameplay do I want? Is it supposed to be fast-paced? Is it supposed to be slow and methodical? Like, there are some things you can do for sure. Yeah. But
actually, because we didn't actually talk about this, and that, like, if I'm, because there are definitely times where I'll be stuck on an area, like, I don't know what to do here, and sometimes you can go look through the inspiration folder, and that bolt of lightning hits, and away you go. One other thing that I've realized, and this one I really like, it was more like there was a conscious thought when I did my Map Witch 2 map, is there are always tasks you can do that take, once you've reached a certain point in your map in terms of its development, 50%, 60%, whatever, there are tasks you can do that don't require much thought. You can go twiddle some rocks. Like if it's UDMF, I go align flats. Some people do automap cleanup. There's things you can do that don't require much creative thought, and you can just it's just work. And you just start doing that. At least you're doing something, and it's productive, so you feel good. Okay, I'm getting some shit done. I didn't want to do this. I didn't know what I'm doing, but at least I'm doing something. Yeah, okay, cool. And I find that you do that for half an hour or so, an hour. Yeah, you've been twiddling this stuff around, and all of a sudden, I don't actually know. I don't know what I'm going to do over there now. It's actually really important. I think it's really useful to have like small make work tasks that you can do in a map in those moments where you are dry creatively. And it keeps you in that positive mindset of achieving, doing something, progress is being made. It's work that would have to have been done anyway, so it's not like you're wasting time. It might feel like it because you're not making big leaps and strides through your layout, or making huge fights, or making beautiful vistas, but it's still time being well spent. And I made a real. There was a set of stairs in Mapwitch 2 that there's a lot of manual alignment. We're talking like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sectors to do the trims, because I love it. I love to trim my stairs. And yeah, it's just like, I'm just going to start doing this. I remember very vividly, I'm just going to do this. This will keep me busy for a while. I'll get some work done. And then by the time I'd done that for a while, I was like, I know what I want to do now in this next zone. So don't overlook menial tasks as a useful process. Right. One from Piety for me. When it comes to creative process, do you build with ideas, concepts in mind? Or do you just create structures, areas, and allow yourself to simply expand on those elements? Both. Like it's we talked about it, like, planning too heavily versus organic processes, and like I think everyone is probably this to a degree, but you're at your best when you utilize both. You plan some, and I will generally have, at least for someone like Age of Hell, it's quite easy because I've got themes for each episode, which helps focus the mind on a specific kind of concept. Episode 1, it's all blue brutalism, lots of sloped concrete. Cool, we're gonna make big concrete things. I know what textures I'm going to use, and there'll be specific things that I'm going to try and create this thing. But there's also like, I just know that I want to put a circular thing here or a bridge. I don't know what it's going to look like until I finish it. I'll just start building stuff. But I've got like a repertoire of kind of base concepts, like the specific kind of light design that I've been doing a lot of. It's like a sloped profile that abuts the side of a bridge or something, and I've just been splattering that design everywhere, and I love it. All the lights hanging from chains I've been doing a lot of in the current map, and it's fun. I do enjoy like organically coming up with an idea, and they're like, I really like this. But then we're gonna iterate that through, and it becomes a more planned thing, because I'm going to use these, say for instance the hanging chain lights, as a progression signal through this area, and they're always going to be hanging from rocks, and it becomes a more conscious decision at that point to do the thing. One from Mr. AD for both of us. What would you consider to be good exercises in order to get creative energy flowing?
Since you just won, I guess I'll go. There's a lot. There is many. I wrote down a bunch. Ones that have worked for me in the past. Ones that I thought were just good ideas. So I mentioned on some of these earlier, would be to think about what kind of gameplay your map has. Just that can be a good start to what you want. So is it a slow map? Is it a fast map? Do you want verticality? All these things that nudge you in certain directions. I would say you could consider what you haven't done before, or what you haven't seen done before.
I like that one.
If that's interesting to you, why is it interesting? What would be fun for you to play is a really big one.
I like that. Like I do like that. I want to go back to that. What haven't I? What's new? And that kind of ties back to that. Like trying to push yourself into new and exciting areas. What haven't I made before? What's a new concept? Visual design element or fight style. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be just like what kind of thing haven't I made, like in a visual. Yeah, what kind of fight haven't I made before? I think thinking about new ideas, and you can get that from playing other games and other WODs, and like and then I think that's probably like, I did enjoy that fight in that map.
Yeah,
I should make something like that and put your own spin on it, obviously. But I like that idea.
And some people actually do suffer a little bit from that, where they try to make every single map unique. So I would say just be reasonable with it.
Yeah, really. I think because at least for me personally, I'll lean into that idea when I need an idea. Like I'm quite happy to make a lot of similar stuff, particularly like in an episodic kind of setup. Like you want some consistency, and you'll see the same things popping up, particularly in maps that I've made in sequence. there'll be the same ideas that kind of flow between them. But then it's like, I'm going to try something new here. And then like, I can do this.
There's sort of like a side satchel of kind of things you can do when you want ideas versus when you're just generally looking for energy, I would think. And that probably goes in there as like things you haven't done before. That's something to jumpstart you.
Yeah, I definitely did that with the Slaughter Spectrum, and when I did some rebuilds, it's like I need to make some new kind of fights that I haven't done before, and I definitely made the map.
Could certainly be fun.
Definitely made Crimson Chaos a lot better for that.
Gonna keep going down the list here because I wrote a few. We talked about this earlier, but arbitrary restrictions are really good. So that's like your speed mapping, and your maybe you want to restrict yourself to boom or vanilla or something. Maybe you want to put a really arbitrary monster limit, like I only want to use 5 monster types, or I only, like Jimmy's isolation project, we had to put all our health pickups on the water flat. Whoa, like that that'll just like your creativity it's restricted, but at the same time you get to think of weird ways to put things in weird places and do wacky stuff.
Your brain just starts to go, well, how can I do this? What kind of ideas
I
can
actually
I do?
think that's a good way for me to put how my best maps have been. Like they've just been genuinely wacky. Like the wackier and like more, just like creativity, just like wacky stuff, do wacky stuff, put weird restrictions on it. And then it's good.
I mean, that kind of stuff doesn't work so well in a project, like a multi-map. So that's good for like if you just want to get a map made. Like, what weird restrictions can I put on it or constraints to spike the creativity? But if it's a bigger thing where there's multi-maps and whatnot, it's good. Yeah, it can still work. Okay, I'm going to make this map 5. It's going to be restricted to this play space. Yeah, you could like.
I think if you have a megawad designed, not megawad, but something that's specifically designed to latch on to that sort of design philosophy, then that's cool.
But I think you could actually, now that I think about it, the health on your water would be a little bit strange, but you could actually do that and just have that as a concept in a map and don't tell anyone. It's just a visual restriction.
Well, I mean,
and I don't think people.
I
don't think people would notice.
Even
with something that's that specific. And modest mapping had a sector limit and a monster type limit. You could still do that. Like it
was also vanilla, so
I limited myself to a certain number of weapons in one of the Age of Hell maps deliberately. It's like this is a restriction. I'm gonna like just because I wanted to have weapon progression through the episode more, but it was a specific restriction I put on in that map, which I don't think people are really going to notice until they get to the end. Like, I never got the super shocker. I've only got these 3 weapons. Interesting. And
at its worst, what it does is it just allows you to think more outside of the box, if anything. So,
by being put in a box, you will think outside of it.
Pretty much. And
a lot of people do that. Like restriction breeds creativity, and I think that does. Yeah, that is true for most people.
I think it would lean more heavily towards the side satchel of ideas for when you're out of ideas sort of thing, but you can definitely use it when you're still fresh, for sure. So like, that's I know that's something I do when I want to make a map and I want to get a map made. I'm like, what wacky shit can I do to just make myself make a map?
Yeah, what's something interesting that I can latch onto and get the old noggin.
And then my last few bullet points here are just be in a good space mentally to get the creative juices flowing. Tick off your to-do lists. Make sure your brain is kind of uncluttered.
Yep. Yeah.
You go in with positivity. I don't subscribe to the whole like tortured artist has to like.
No, I don't like that idea. I mean, tortured artists can make some great art, and I think it probably lends itself to like things like music, where you can, like an emotional outpouring can be manifest.
And certainly people can like have their emotions, like they can pour their emotions into their work, and that works.
Yeah.
So I guess in that sense, that's more of like a me thing. Like that's how I would do it.
No, I'd agree, and I'd look at other people and when they're sad, they don't. I'd say it's very much a common. Thing. It's like
it is a trope.
Particularly with mapping, is like people who are happy and in a good headspace are productive and make stuff. I just thinking, if you're not sure what you go fucking do the dishes. Go vacuum the house. Go do something,
that's a
and
concept.
and you'll feel good about doing the thing. You'll stand up, get the blood flowing, a bit of fresh air, maybe go for and you then sit down. Okay, cool. I've achieved something today. What can we do here now? And you'll probably be in a better headspace. When it comes to the creative side of things.
Yeah, I definitely subscribe to that idea. Like this idea of momentum carries you, and the old adage, like the idle mind is the devil's paradise or whatever it is, where like the more stagnant and the less you're moving around, like it's just like associated with slowing down and just not doing much. You just don't want to be there, in my opinion.
I can advocate for getting a standing desk. I actually think that actually helps quite a bit, to be honest. It's just a bit more energetic. You get the just easier to kind of keep in a fresh frame of mind. Sitting down makes you tired. I actually think the standing desk has been a really one of the best.
Moving both physically and metaphysically.
That was one of my best decisions I made recently, I reckon. One from Warren, and we did kind of cover this off with a bit with the Mapwitch map discussion. But have you ever run into a creatively blocked deadline? And if so, what would be your move in that situation? I mean, there's numerous projects that pop up, like Mayhem, where there's a time limit and stuff like that. I don't think I've got anything specific where I've had a block with a deadline looming. It's just more like I've got a lot of work to do. I need to get the fuck to do it. And Joy Mapping 6 3-day limit. I actually was making a map. And this is the first map I ever released, and my original idea was too big, way too big. So I actually deleted the entire map almost on the third day and started again, which was the best decision I could have made at that point. So I think that's probably the closest comparison. Is actually I need to reset a bit and refocus on what I'm trying to achieve here, because say if you're mapping and you've got a few days left and you haven't finished it, well, maybe you don't. Maybe you are finished. Maybe that's it. Maybe you actually finished the map and you just need to slap an exit in. I think refocusing if you're able to, and paring down what's in your head versus what's on the editor screen. If you're only like 20% of the way through and it's just a bare bones skeleton, or if it's built in a way that you can't, well, that's going to happen. But I think that's quite a useful thing. I think that ruthlessness to recognize this idea is too much. I need to make it less, and then I will be done. Or you could be like simple and map for 35 hours straight.
I've definitely been in the position of staring a deadline in the face multiple times. That's just sort of my personality. I'm a procrastinator.
Guilty.
But I would say in those situations, I mean, the first bit of advice is don't be in the situation, but obviously that doesn't help the question. But it does help a little bit, just in general, for going a little bit outside of the question. But the more you chunk it out, the less you'll have to worry about that. But I think that there comes a point where you either go through with it or you don't. And if you can't go through with it, don't sweat it, because most project leaders are pretty chill with that sort of thing.
I was going to say, if you recognize that you won't be able to finish, and just tell them, and they might give you an extension. They might say sweet. And people drop out of projects all the time. It's common. You're not a bad person for it happening. You might feel bad at the time, but no reasonable person's gonna give you shit for that. Your own well-being sort of comes before something like that. I would say, don't kill yourself working on a map for 35 hours if you don't have to. Because I don't comment here in the chat. Got out of small-scale burnout by forcing yourself to stop for a full day. So that was back to our previous conversation about recognizing what is the cause of your mapper's block, or lack of creativity. Quite sometimes it is just energy levels, and definitely, particularly over the last few weeks, I have been, I do have some deadlines looming, but there's been days I'm too tired. I need to go to bed. at like 8:30. Get home from work, go to the gym, have dinner, bed. Like, just don't even think about trying to achieve anything creative. It's like, this is a write-off, and that's sometimes that is the best decision you can make. Just try and refresh, and push it out of your head for a few days. Like very few things will matter if you don't do it for a few days or a week. If you need to take a week, to recharge, play some games, or just do something completely different for a while. That is, those mental resets, very valuable, very powerful.
By the way, I said everything I said as being somebody who has several deadlines looming at the moment. So, still advice that carries.
All right, here's one from Junction 8. How attached do you find yourselves to your design? Say you're making an area that you absolutely love, but by the end of the map's development, you start to recognise that the one spot you really loved just doesn't cut it anymore. Do you try and salvage it, or do you start fresh? Do you want to go first?
So, I personally usually feel sort of attached. That's something I have to get a little bit better at, but it is definitely important to know when something does not work. For surezies. Because if something's not working, it's just sort of like you need to cut out the chaff. And
it becomes like a weight dragging the map down.
It will be a weight in the back of your head as well. You're like, I know that's not working. Like, in the back of your head, like you might feel precious about the idea. You might have put time into it, like we talked about sunk time fallacy earlier. Like, you might think that looks really pretty, but if it doesn't serve the map, it probably shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like even if you take that to the extreme, like maybe you've got like a week left and it's just like really glaring and it's just really bad. Like, actually, I do have an example for that. Like Jimmy's Isolation, I released a pretty bad map the first time, and I probably should have pared some things back and just redone them. But I kept on working with an idea that wasn't working, and that's where it led me. So there is a silver lining to that, is that I did finish the map and it was a lot better. But I could have done it that way when I was in the situation, but I chose not to because I was a little bit too precious about my ideas. So
I'm definitely someone that hates deleting things. I will, and it's also linked to the way that I design areas. It's like shaping clay. I always think of it like there's a lot of iterating around, and some people iterate ideas like try something, delete, try something, delete, try something, delete. And I know mappers that do that. For me, it's like, okay, here's this shape, and I'll just craft it and bend it, and like, okay, now we'll change that, and then we'll redo this bit, and like, wiggle the lines around, and we'll change that orientation there, and it slowly takes form. So I'm pretty good at reworking zones that I might not be happy with anymore. I need to detail this a bit better, or it can be a bit of shape or whatever. Every now and then there is like the current map that I'm in. The end, that was the first thing I made when I got into the brutalism, and it's not bad, but it's not good enough. Definitely recognise that this is a area that is a full rebuild. We'll keep the same concept, we'll keep the same broad shapes, but I'm going to remake it largely from scratch. So that will get a clean out, and then a remake. So there is a point, even with me, where it's like, nah, this, like you say, this is not serving the purpose that I want it to, and it just sits there, like you say, as a fucking weight in the back of your head. This isn't good enough. So yeah, very much. Yeah, and you talk about sunk cost fallacy, and yeah, I like the term throwing good money after bad. You don't want to keep pouring time into something where you know that you can't bring it up to the level that you want it. So it is important to recognise where the line lies for you personally, in terms of like, are you willing to keep reworking it, or is it better to just kill it and start again? And
I think you can sort of have an idea, like a sort of process to get yourself out of that situation to begin with, by not mapping yourself into a corner, so to speak, or not detailing yourself, whatever you want to call it, detailing yourself into a corner. Where if you keep things relatively simple and you don't like obsess about one thing, I mean, I know you tend to, detail things in big chunks sometimes, but like it can be a sort of detrimental to people that are sort of predisposed to that sort of mapping yourself into a corner deal, where you got this beautiful opening room, And then next to it, everything else just kind of looks like putty. And it's like, you kind of have to feel like you have to bring yourself up to that level of that first thing you built, and you can't quite do it. And you're like, oh man, but I don't want to delete it.
Yeah.
And it's like, just don't put yourself in that situation in the first place.
Because the way I work around, you're right, I get stuck into detailing very quickly. It's what I do, and I don't really recommend that as a process.
And that's why there's multiple processes you can use.
But the way I've learned to... the way I tend to start with the center of a space and build out, because that way I'm not locked into a certain confined area. So I tend to try and start in and work out, both in terms of just the map layout.
Work out?
Yeah, that too. And the other thing is I'll fiddle with the details early on, like what kind of lights do I want to put in here, or like the staircase, let's get this kind of looking cool, and I'll do it in such a way that it's easy to manipulate that after the fact, like I can move those out, move that section out a bit further, or rotate that in a different direction, and it's a learned skill, and yeah, like I said, I wouldn't recommend that process to people generally, but like I say, if it works for you, it works for you. And it definitely works for me. Right. Dr. Nate, sneaking with a second question. For both every new map, each new project, what are you trying to improve from your previous works? What do you keep in mind when starting something new?
Since I went last time, I will hand that over to you.
So usually I don't put too much thought into I want to be better at X. The few exceptions though, so good example, Bastion of Chaos. I made a conscious decision at the beginning to make a more intricately entwined layout. It's still a linear map, but I wanted the visual interlinking and this less symmetry, and try and get a bit more kind of organic in the layout. And that was inspired by a couple other maps, that idea, and I kind of studied them a little bit. Not massively, just kind of a few screenshots here and there, and sketched out some ideas prior to starting the work. But yeah, I think it's just more generally it's what kind of visual thing haven't I made yet, or what can I do? Yeah, no, I don't think about it that often, to be honest. Because the way I get inspired by things is, I'll go look through that inspiration folder, and ideas will just pop into my head, and oh, that sounds cool, and it'll inevitably it'll just be something fairly new. I'm conscious of trying to vary up things like textures between maps and stuff, but it also helps. Say with Age of Hell, there's different episodes, so I know that while I've been making a lot of the Brutalist. So go to episode 2, it'll be completely different. And I have already made some maps for that. So, I think having those episode differences, innately having different visual themes, means that it'll just push my creativity into a different area. And I can start tapping into other inspiration sources that I haven't been able to do before, because they've been a Gothic castle, which doesn't really work in Brutalism. Probably forced it.
So for myself, to answer that question, I would say that a lot of the time I just sort of go back and see what worked. I don't always do what I did the last time, but I do put some importance in knowing what worked and why. As for what I'm trying to improve, it just to make the experience a bit more contiguous, maybe a bit more professional, a bit more put together. Because some of my other maps, some of the critiques have been maybe the progression was a bit obfuscating, or this didn't quite work out, or whatever. So it's just sort of general, just make it play better sort of deal. I wouldn't say. So it is a two-parter. So it's what do you keep in mind when starting something new? I don't always try to break new ground, but I do try and do something fresh, maybe it's a different theme. Maybe it's a certain type of gameplay I haven't done before. There was a bit where I was doing slaughter maps all the time, and I kind of wanted to get away from that, so I started doing a little bit more tight technical stuff. My TMMC map was all run and gun, slight slaughter, but mostly run and gun.
I'll actually second
And
that. Like, it's something that I've been thinking about a bit more is trying to mix up. Since Bastion is like trying to mix up fight style and counter design. More open, free flowing stuff, and I think I'd agree with that. It's something that I've been trying to do is not lean so heavily on set pieces because Bastion of Chaos is almost entirely set piece, and that's not bad. But it's like I think trying to mix up that is a kind of easy thing. Well, not easy, but like it feels like it doesn't require a huge amount of like forethought or planning or creative lightning bolts. So I just want to create some slightly different fights, just make these areas a bit more open than I usually do and not lock the player into spaces, and it just naturally kind of occurs, at least for me.
I just always want to make sure when I do something new that it's going to be fun for me. That's something I always keep in mind when I'm starting something else.
Yep. Yeah, it's important.
That's like number one. That's numero uno.
For sure. And last one from me. Where do you think the line is for repeating objects in map design? And by that I mean things such as patterns. How much do you feel the player really pays attention to making everything different over using more repeating patterns in design? And I'll lead this one off as someone who does a lot of repeating patterns. There's a point where you want some visual consistency, and I like repeating patterns and like sigils that appear throughout the map. There's and through an episode and that kind of stuff. I think that's really cool, and like a sense of consistency and linking things together. But there's obviously a point where it starts to feel like, well, this person's just copy pasting shit. But I think you can like visual motifs and sigils and that kind of stuff. Those I think having those repeat through is a good thing. A lot of the time, and it's a pretty common thing to do in a lot of games and Doom maps.
I absolutely agree. For whatever reason, I wrote that down earlier. Actually, I wrote down the word motifs and design beats, and making sure the map is thematically consistent and sort of follows. Like, I think that's sort of like falls into the territory of like making sure the map feels like contiguous, like it has like an identity.
I think you're much more likely to end up things feeling disjointed and chaotic if you vary too much. Like, I think that's probably a bigger danger. You play those maps when there's just too many different textures, too much variation in design. I think that's probably a bigger issue, and you're more likely to fall into that than too much repeating. For me personally, anyway.
And I think maybe the question is more like, there's a bit of ambiguity. Like, is it like copy pasting, or is it like, is the map like contiguous? Because I feel like it's really, I always find it very cool when I can see a map, like this is usually like AAA games and stuff, where I see a map that's clearly doing the same theme and it has the same visual cues and consistencies, but they iterate on it and make it like a little bit different. Yep. Like, sure, this is still a tech pillar, but like we've done this up here, and that's like a cool little nub, and it like looks different to the rest of the scene, but yet it's all still the same. Or like you come into an area where like there's crenellations, and you're like, oh my god, look, the crenellations are back, and then it's like having like these little bits and bobs that recur throughout the map is cool. I like it. I think it's fun.
I think Doom Eternal, there's a lot of examples of that, like repeating design. Like there's a certain stair decal that they use to detail it. It's in the Doom Fortress at the beginning, but it appears in multiple maps as well. And most people are probably going to notice that. But when I spot that kind of stuff, like, oh, I love it. They've done the same thing here. Fuck yeah, they've reused that awesome design. I really like that kind of stuff, and it makes everything feel, like you say, contiguous.
Because to me, it's like if you make an asset, you want to use the asset, and I feel like if you don't use it enough times, it's kind of like, well, it's a little bit of a waste. So use it more. It's also those in there.
It's also efficient as well, like from a workflow perspective, which is important, particularly if you're getting into bigger projects and stuff. You don't want to waste time. Like, I need to make a different kind of light here. What am I going to do now? I talked about a certain light profile that I've used in the last couple of maps for Age of Hell, and there's a bit of variance there, but there's a consistency of a design theme there, and I can mix it up by using different light textures to create variance and slightly different heights and shapes and orientations, but there's a consistency across there.
Yes.
And it's like, I like this. I think this looks good. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to use that light everywhere, but you see them popping up all over the place.
That to me gives the map an identity, and I like seeing it because it's like you could see where the original idea was, but they keep changing it up a little bit. I like that.
And like, it's important to like where you want your variety is in your room designer, because I didn't raised a good point here. And like, it depends on the context. You're having the same kind of crate design repeating through a map. That's fine. Like, it makes sense. Like, if you've got a kind of thing where there's crate, with someone's made crates, like, people aren't going to make a different crate every time. It's not efficient. If you think about that in like a real world context, this is a good design for a crate, therefore we will make lots of these crates. So you'd see them scattered around, like in a warehouse setting or whatever. But if it's like a car, cars have different colours, they're different models. So you probably want to vary them up a bit. You can have a couple of the same. You probably have like 3 or 4. Like if you had like a kind of like, let's say you're making a post-apocalyptic kind of wasteland and there's a motorway with strewn cars, you'd want to have some variety there. If it was all the same car, it would look pretty fucking weird. You don't have to make them all different, but you'd want like, I don't know, half a dozen different colours and slightly different shapes. And that would be quite an easy thing to iterate through. From a design perspective, you wouldn't have to change too much because you still want the same basic shape. It's still a car. And certainly, you definitely want your variety in your spaces. That's unless you're making something like an office block where there is repeating cubicles or something like that. And but generally, you want your big shapes to be different, and that's like, even if there's the same crates in that room, well, the next room's a different shape. It's a different fight. It's a different encounter. It's a different presentation. That's when the variety comes in, and it's like, oh, this is a new space. It has new things in it. Oh, it has the same crate, but it's new stuff. So I think that's where the lines lie.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, if the idea is cars, I mean, well, you have a few sedans and you have a few buses and you have a few trucks. Like, it doesn't have to be the same car copy pasted.
Exactly. And creating those assets wouldn't be terribly difficult. Like, once you've made your first car, so we'll just lather, rinse, repeat, change the colours, damage a few, make some into vans. Pretty easy, I think, to go through that.
I would say doubly so with the whole visual consistency thing. Like, if you've denoted like an object as something that the player should keep in the back of your mind, like, it should be sort of like the same when you see it. Yep. Like, this is like switches, and like maybe there's a certain crate that means supplies. Like, in those cases,
very important.
Consistency is important.
Yep. And like
as much.
A certain colour can be progression. Like, there's actually some good gameplay concepts in terms of your design where consistency is definitely what you want.
Well, yeah. Like the new Dooms, it's like green means go and red means no. Yep. So then they do that the entire game, and that's something that is important.
Yeah,
signals progression.
Yeah, particularly, I think that really stood out to me in Doom 16 as like green lights on ledges that you can grab. Like, this is where you're meant to go, and it was like, good usage of just lighting in general, but also like this colour means green means go, come up here.
Yep.
Very good. Question from Mr. Cat, how are you? I'm fucking fantastic.
I'm great. Kind of have to pee, but I'm great.
Well, we have been going for 2 hours. Unless anyone has another question, we'll end it here. Thanks for coming on, Simple. We've been building up for this one a little while. I think we covered up some good stuff, and I think the creativity, like, it's definitely going to be a topic to revisit, because I feel like it's something that you can discuss almost ad nauseum, and it's always kind of like a useful kind of conversation. And what I want to do next time is probably get a bit more of a round table kind of thing going, get a few other people's inputs, and I've had some volunteers for that. So I think for the people, like, one thing I wanted for this episode to be was actually like it was a helpful one for people who do struggle with creativity, and hopefully we'll hit those notes. I think the more perspectives you get, the better, because there'll be, like, with 2 people, like, we've got 2 different perspectives here. If you get 4 people, well, you've got 4 different perspectives, and then the people listening and watching could go, that person there, that person resonates with me, their issues and the way that they think, and because creativity is such a ephemeral concept. It is a hard one to practice. There are tips and tricks that you can go through, but it's a personal journey. So you want to try and find someone who has gone through a similar journey to you, and you can see yourself in their experiences and go, oh, well, they did that, and that worked for them. Maybe I should try that. Whereas, people would look at, someone like myself maybe and go, well, I don't think like that, therefore your experiences are not, they're interesting, but they're not helpful for me in my journey. But thank you, Simple. Thank you, everyone. We will be back as always, and it was a pleasure.
Cheers.